This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Death by Southwest listeners. Trying to adjust this ridiculous webcam that I have. Welcome back to Death by Southwest. I don't even know what episode we're on, but it's a good one. I have a good one for you today. So let's jump right into it. We're not even gonna do any of my usual blabbing. We're gonna get going because I am fascinated by this episode. So today's episode takes place in a place called Quinlan, Texas. So it's nestled in the flatlands of northeast Texas, about 45 minutes east of Dallas. It's a small rural town, population just around 1,500, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, knows your business. The roads are lined with farmhouses, barns, and stretches of quiet wooded land. There is a Dollar General, a handful of gas stations, a few mom and pop diners, and honestly, not much else. There's a Lake Tawakoni, a few miles away. It's a massive reservoir that locals use for fishing, boating, and the occasional weekend getaway. It's a peaceful, unassuming, and deeply Texan place. The kind of town where nothing big ever happens until one day it did. So we are diving into a case today that is equal parts bizarre, frustrating, and as always, very heartbreaking. Michael Glenn Chambers was the definition of solid. A retired firefighter, a husband, a grandfather, a guy you could call at 3 a.m. and he'd show up with tools, snacks, and a smile. But on a quiet afternoon in Quinlan, Texas, Michael walked into his workshop and was never seen again. What was left behind? A locked garage, a missing phone, a wallet with no license, and a cluster of blood drops that were so perfectly placed it looked more like a movie set than a crime scene. This is the mysterious case of Michael Chambers. Michael Glenn Chambers was the kind of man you wanted in your corner. Like I said, he was a firefighter, he was a deacon, a husband, a father, a grandfather, and he was one hell of a fixer. He was born November 27th, 1946, in the small town of Italy, Texas. I didn't even know there was a town called Italy, Texas. Population just under 2,000. He was raised with old school values and small town grit. By his 20s, he was chasing his dream of becoming a firefighter, eventually earning the title of driver engineer for the Dallas Fire Department, where he was responsible for navigating massive fire trucks and operating technical equipment under pretty extreme pressure. So another way to put this is that he was kind of the calm amongst the chaos of being a firefighter. He was known for being very dependable, very kind, the type of man who not only remembered birthdays, but showed up to help you fix your car or a leaky pipe, and then stayed to eat dinner with your whole family. At home, he was just as devoted as he was on the job and in his social life. He was devoted to his first two daughters, Susie and Sherry, that he had with his first wife. They were only married for a few years and then divorced. And then later he married his second wife, Becca Chambers. They got married in 1980. Together, they adopted two sons, John and Justin, and built a life on a quiet 10-acre property in Quinlan. Michael was referred to as Papa. Everyone called him Papa. And he had 9 grandkids and 6 great grandkids. Sorry, I couldn't even read my own notes there. He loved cooking. He would cook a holiday feast and still have the energy to play with all the grandkids outside or build a fort with them. After retiring in 2008, Michael didn't slow down. He restored classic cars, he sang in a gospel quartet, and he served as a deacon at the local church. He was the kind of guy who meant it when he said, "Call me if you need anything." You know those people. There are people who say that all the time, but you're never going to call them. Michael was the guy that you did call. He wasn't just well liked, he was loved by everyone who knew him. And then he vanished. March 10th, 2017, It was a cool morning in Quinlan, partly cloudy, 60 degrees, and the day started like any other for Michael and Becca. Becca went off to work as a home health nurse. Michael planned to cut some firewood and work on a car. Michael and Becca talked on the phone around 8 a.m., and Becca asked him, "Could you pick up some mascara for me sometime today?" So, run a few errands. So, around 11 a.m., Michael made a quick trip to Walmart, where surveillance footage caught him buying mascara for Becca and a few other items. He was by himself. He seemed unhurried. He seemed calm. Just an average day running some errands at the Wally World. After Walmart, he returned home. We know this because a receipt from his trip to Walmart was found in the bathroom trash, and the items that he bought at Walmart were put away in the bedroom bathroom. But this is where Michael's timeline pretty much goes dark. Around 3 p.m., the next door neighbor was home and spent the afternoon working in his yard. So has a clear view of Michael's house and didn't notice anything unusual. At 5:50 p.m., Becca texted Michael and said that she was leaving work. He didn't respond, which was a little bit weird, but she wasn't alarmed. Not yet. By 6:30, she was home, and as she pulled up, she noticed Michael's truck was parked in the driveway. The house looked dark, so she got out, went to the house. The door was locked, let herself in. It's dark inside, and Michael is nowhere to be found. Becca called his phone immediately, and it went straight to voicemail. Now she's worried. So she starts reaching out to family, asking if anyone's heard from him, seen him. Maybe he's gone over to visit someone. No one has heard anything. No one knew anything. So she went and knocked on some neighbors' doors. And one of the neighbors who happened to be home was also a retired police chief. She explained what was going on, and he said, "Okay, let me help you. Let's look." Remember, they're on a 10-acre property. So this retired police chief and Becca start searching the property. They're looking in the woods on the property, just walking around, calling for Michael, not getting any reply. Then they decide to head to Michael's sanctuary, his workshop. Now, the workshop was apparently locked because it looked like Becca had to use her key to unlock it. And this was unusual because when Michael was working in his workshop, he usually kept the big door open for airflow. He's working in a workshop. There are fumes from working on cars, painting, all those things. So it was weird that it was locked. She might assume that he's not in there because the door is locked. But nonetheless, she took out her key, seemed to unlock the door, went inside, and that's when everything changed. Inside the workshop, Becca and her neighbor found Michael's wallet, his fire department baseball cap, and his keys, all sitting neatly right there on the counter. And then by one of the classic cars that he was working on, Becca noticed something on the concrete floor. Blood. In fact, it was a trail of blood. And this wasn't just any blood trail. It was a blood trail that was comprised of perfectly round dots. Each were about the size of a nickel, but they looked almost like they had been placed there, like on purpose. And this very, very neat and perfect blood trail led to a concentrated pool of about 100 blood droplets in a circular pattern. So the way I'm understanding this is it's not like a puddle of blood. It's more specific than that, but it is a lot of blood in one area. Perfectly round droplets. So it looked like somebody staged this. It looked like something from a movie rather than an actual accident. And here's where things get even more strange. Next to the blood droplets and the blood pool was a wooden dowel rod, which to the best of my ability, understand as a wooden rod, basically. Kind of looks like a bat, but it's not a bat. It was upright, leaning against the wall, and had definite traces of blood on it. So they were thinking, was this a weapon? Is this what caused these blood droplets? Maybe. But there was no mess. There was like no sign of a struggle. Each droplet looked like it was like perfectly placed. There was no blood trails leading outside. The blood was just exactly where it was. There's this bloodied, wooden bat like thing leaning up against the wall, but there's no blood anywhere else. No blood spatter, nothing. At 6:50 p.m., the retired cop neighbor called 911, and the Hunt County Sheriff's Office responded quickly and with full force. Before anyone knew it, there were search dogs, a helicopter with thermal imaging, full property sweeps over the whole 10 acres, scoured, including there was a nearby lake, Lake Tawakoni. They looked there too. Sorry, there's a bug flying around. No clues, nothing. They found nothing. Michael's truck, untouched. Now, his iPhone was missing, but inside the console of his truck, there was $1,000 of cash still sitting there. So we can assume this is not a robbery. His driver's license was missing from his wallet. I don't know if I said that. No, I said they found the wallet. So yeah, that was missing, his driver's license. But that's weird. Like, why just the license? All of his cards, that cash, everything else is left behind. Police dust for fingerprints. The only fingerprints in the workshop are Michael's, which isn't that weird. Becca doesn't spend a lot of time in there. And those blood drops, we're going to talk about those multiple times. But remember, I said that they didn't really lead anywhere. They didn't lead to the sink. There was a sink. So it's not like someone's bleeding or covered in someone else's blood and is walking to the sink trying to clean up. No, no, no. It didn't lead to the sink. There are rags, plenty of like rags and towels and stuff in this workshop. None of them were used. The blood drops just kind of stopped. And the garage being locked. This was something else that was a point of like weirdness. Why was it like he never really locked this? But if he had been in there and someone had taken him, they could have, it's like it's one of those you can turn the lock on the knob on the doorknob and pull it shut. So you can just lock it without the key, basically. So maybe someone took because like we're assuming if this blood is Michael's, he didn't go into his workshop, bleed all over, and not even all over, just like bleed in this very specific pattern, and then walk out and be like, oh, let me lock my door. Right? That seems odd. So, did someone take him and they locked it? Did he just walk out of here? Like maybe it wasn't that big of an injury. He was just bleeding a lot. Lots of questions at this point, obviously. So, they brought in a blood spatter expert who reviewed the scene. It did turn out that the blood was, in fact, Michael's. And then the expert said what everyone is thinking. This looks staged. The blood was too perfect, too kind of contained. And the color of the blood was also something of interest. It was really, really bright red, unnaturally bright red, which can indicate an anticoagulant, which is more commonly known as a blood thinner. And so that's used when people get their blood drawn so the blood doesn't clot sometimes. So, okay, police and blood spatter expert are considering maybe Michael's blood had been drawn. Maybe he drew it himself or someone else. And then, like used an eyedropper or something very specific to drop it on the floor in this pattern so it looked like Michael was injured or hurt. I mean, okay. Do we really think this 70-year-old man staged, like drew his own blood and staged his own what? Murder? Disappearance? Kidnapping? It just didn't seem like Michael. Michael was a family man. He had, as I said, a billion grandchildren and great grandchildren and kids. And he was part of the church. I mean, he was a community member and a known and visible and active community member. So this just did not make sense. The family eventually brought in a private investigator, Philip Klein, and right away he had a pretty different take on the blood scene. He said that the blood didn't look staged. Instead he believed that the blood drops were a result of Michael being carried by two people, one person under his arms and one person at his feet, which would kind of make this like zigzagging pattern, and the blood could drip in this strange but perfect kind of way. Now, I don't know. I've never tested that. I'm kind of just gonna believe this guy. Seems like he knows what he's talking about. And the bright red color, he said, it doesn't mean that the blood had been, it doesn't have to mean that the blood has been treated with an anticoagulant. He said arterial blood is rich in oxygen and flows from the lungs, and that appears brighter than venous blood. So if he'd been struck in the head and was bleeding from the ear or mouth, that could explain the drip pattern and the bright color, which is a very interesting take that the police didn't have. One thing still didn't sit right, though. Well, we're going to find out it's much more than one thing. But at this point, one thing isn't sitting right. And that is the wooden bat type thing. It had blood on it, but there was no spatter. There was no mess. You know, you hit somebody hard enough with a wooden bat, there's there's blood everywhere and it doesn't fall in this perfect like concentric circles. So it seemed like maybe if Michael had been struck with this, it had happened elsewhere and then the garage was where he came afterwards. Again, to me, this doesn't make sense. Why is someone beating him up elsewhere? And the property, they haven't found blood on the property. So we're talking off of this 10-acre property. Then they bring him or he brings himself to his workshop, not the house. They don't find any blood or anything in the house, just the workshop, the garage. And then leaves this blood, then leaves the garage, locks the door behind him, and goes where? Or then they take him where? Like, what would be the point of this garage stop? Unless, I guess, unless you are staging your kidnapping, murder, suicide. It's not adding up, though. And for police, it's not adding up either. They're pretty stumped at this point. And so they're hoping to gain more insight by talking to family and friends, trying to determine if Michael had any enemies, any people that he had a problem with. He didn't. Everyone really loved this man. The sheriff, Randy Meeks, he knew Michael very well and confirmed everyone adored him. And no one really seemed suspicious, aside from that he didn't have any enemies, just no one kind of like put up red flags at this point. But there were a few additional things that were weird as this investigation moves forward over the coming days. There are some things that are red flaggy. First of all, Becca had told police that the door was locked and she had to use her key to get into the garage. But the neighbor, the retired police chief, said he didn't think it was locked. He did notice that she like took out her key and seemed to want to unlock it, but he said he thought it was open. And then he also said that when she found the blood, like, she's the one who found the blood, it was kind of like theatrical. It was almost, she found it too quickly and too like, oh my God, there's blood here. It just didn't seem totally natural. But what I always like to remember in situations like this, I have no idea how I would act if I couldn't find Mark and I showed up at his house and it was locked and his phone or his wallet was there and like, and the garage was, it was an odd scene. I don't know that you can really judge someone's like reaction, behavior, all of that. I mean, you can. It seems like that might be a flimsy thing to go on, though. But this was something that was a question. And they thought, did she want witnesses there? Like, did she go get the neighbor so that the neighbor would be there when she discovered the blood? Like, oh my God. And this, what I'm about to say next, kind of causes me to think maybe. Why did she go get a neighbor and walk around the whole property before ever going to the garage? That was the workshop slash garage was his happy place, his sanctuary. He was always in there. Like, that's where he spent his time. So she went into the house and then she immediately went to the neighbor before ever going in the workshop. Weird. That wasn't all. Sheriff Meeks had called Michael's cell phone several times, apparently, and every time it went right to voicemail. Now, in my research, I could not determine if this, I believe that this piece of information is meant to have been he called Michael before they discovered the blood and that he was missing. I believe. I can't confirm that though. But either way, every time that Sheriff Meeks called Michael's cell phone, it went right to voicemail. Didn't ring, just straight to voicemail. And Sheriff Meeks mentioned this to one of Michael's granddaughters, and she was like, that's weird. That's very odd because he always keeps his phone charged. He always has it in his pocket. Like he's not the type of guy who lets his phone die. You know, my phone's always sitting at like 6%. Not Michael. So the sheriff pulled the phone records and found that the last ping on Michael's phone came at 5:50, the exact moment that Becca texted Michael to say that she was leaving work. And where the phone pinged was near Lake Tawakoni. They've already searched the lake from above with the infrared everything. But with this new information, they're like, all right, well, maybe we missed something. Maybe the infrared heat sensor missed something. So they sent two diving teams into the water. Still nothing. Now they couldn't do a full sweep. Apparently the conditions weren't safe. I don't know exactly what that means. I'm picturing this to be like a small little pond. I don't think it was. I think it was, I mean, it's a lake, so I think it was bigger than that. And for whatever reason, conditions were not safe for them to be checking this lake. But the areas they did check, no body, no clues, nothing. By March 16th, 5 days after Michael vanished, his family wanted to take matters into their own hands a bit. So they launched a Facebook page to gather tips and offered a $25,000 reward for any information that could lead them to Michael. Well, information did come in, but none that led to Michael. It did lead them down a trail of suspicion, and that trail went uncomfortably close to home. So initially, some suspicion, a lot of suspicion, fell on Justin, Michael and Becca's youngest adopted son. So Justin had a complicated history, apparently. He'd been in and out of foster care as a child before he was adopted by Michael and Becca at just 4 years old. But his relationship with Michael and with a handful of other family members was at best strained. In the years leading up to Michael's disappearance, so in recent years, Justin had a habit of calling and asking for money, sometimes begging, sometimes guilt tripping. And Michael was a generous man, and he usually gave in. But a few months before Michael vanished, he put his foot down and he cut Justin off. He said, no more, no more money from me. And that's when the phone calls turned a bit darker, angrier, kind of threatening. And this had the whole family wondering, is Justin capable of this? Police gave him a polygraph and he passed. And they gave him another one and he passed. And there was no direct evidence tying him to the scene. So despite the heated phone calls, threatening phone calls, investigators kind of chalked it up to, family drama, frustration. They did not look at this as an intention for Justin to potentially harm his stepfather. And so they had nothing concrete to go on. So they moved on. And Justin moved on as well. And he focused his suspicions on Becca, apparently asking her point blank if she was involved in whatever happened to his father. Her response? She filed a restraining order against Justin. Now, I did read that it wasn't just kind of like, hey, are you involved in what happened? Like he was a little bit more aggressive than that. But remember, this is his mother, his adopted mother from when he was 4 years old. She's filing a restraining order against him. So either he was very aggressive, I mean, very, or she doesn't want him to go down the road that he's going down. Either way, filing a restraining order because he's worried and asking questions about his missing father seems, I can't find the word that I'm looking for, but it seems like an overreaction. I don't know. Make of that what you will. So, thanks to a tip that police received, Justin wasn't the only one looking at Becca, Michael's wife of 37 years almost, and 10 years his junior. Now, there were multiple reasons that she began to look suspicious, but one of the biggest was her behavior following his his going missing. Her behavior was questionable to say the least. Within 10 days of Michael's disappearance, she suspended his phone plan. She cut off his phone plan. Like this alone removes any chance of, like, what if there's a ping in the future? What if he's been kidnapped and his kidnappers have his phone and they decide to turn it back on in a couple weeks? You know what I mean? Like this, she cut off phone service. That phone is of no use at all. She said, I don't want to keep paying for it. Okay, I guess. I mean, she has a job. She's a home health nurse. Michael was retired, so it's not like he was bringing in that much money. It seems weird. Sorry, my throat just did a weird thing. All right. Seems weird, but is it enough to call her suspicious? Well, it doesn't matter because more suspicious shit was about to happen. 5 weeks later, she applied for a temporary death certificate. What? Like he's missing. There's no indication at this point that he's dead. There wasn't enough blood in the garage to indicate death. She said it's because she didn't want to keep paying for Michael's truck and she needed to sell it, but she needed a temporary death certificate in order to do that. I know nothing about selling someone's car after they've passed or if they've gone missing. So this seems reasonable, but like talk to the car company, see if like see if they can pause the payments, rather than getting a temporary death certificate. Michael's family was unsurprisingly very upset by this. It had only been 5 weeks. They were still hopeful that they would find him alive. And then 2 weeks after his I'm sorry, excuse me, 2 months after his disappearance, so a couple of weeks later, Becca took any hope away from them of finding him alive because she declared him legally dead officially, which unlocked access to his $750,000 pension. She said it was only because she wasn't surviving financially. And look, I can understand financial panic and worry better than a lot of people I know. I'm constantly dealing with it. However, I mean, look, 700, yeah, that'd be great to ease any kind of financial stress. But again, it's not like Michael had a job and was bringing in a bunch of money. He was retired. So maybe he was bringing it, I'm assuming he's bringing in retirement. No idea how much. But like, ask the family for help. Ask your friends for help. I'm sure that in light of this situation, some people would be willing to help you cover your bills until things get figured out. But to 2 months into the investigation, declare him legally dead and then access that pension, the timing of it feels cold and kind of calculated. And that private investigator that the rest of the family hired and got involved, and was looking at the blood spatter and stuff, he wanted to talk to her. He's investigating this alongside the police. And she flat out refused, would not speak to him. Weird. Well, Once police really started speaking to Becca, it turns out it really wasn't that weird that she wasn't willing to speak to the PI because if you have something to hide, you're not going to want to speak to a private investigator, right? And she did have things to hide. She had boyfriends. Yep, that's right. Plural. Boyfriends. Now, she initially admitted to only having one affair, and she said it ended almost a year prior to Michael's disappearance. Now, Michael's family finds this out, and they are blindsided. They'd always believed that Becca and Michael's marriage was not only just solid, but like an enviable marriage. He doted on her. He did everything for her. They seemed to be great friends and have a lot of fun together. So to hear that she'd been unfaithful, it wasn't just surprising. It was like a gut punch for them. To them, Michael and Becca were the gold standard of relationships, really, to this whole giant, large family. So to find out that there were hidden affairs, it shook them down to the foundation. Now, police did bring in the man that Becca said she was seeing, hadn't seen for a year, was seeing a year prior, and found that he had an airtight alibi for the day that Michael went missing. Becca did not have an airtight alibi. And not only that, but she hadn't been honest about how many affairs she'd been having. Phone records showed that there were more men in her life than just Michael and that one admitted affair from a year prior. She had multiple lovers, and she was on the phone with one of those lovers twice on the morning of Michael's disappearance, and again at 2 p.m. that day, which is when she left work. Now, the calls on that day that Michael disappeared, those weren't the only calls between these two. They spoke again the very next morning at 5:30 in the morning. So she's talking to her lover at 5:30 in the morning the day after her husband disappears, and they continue communicating long after Michael's gone. When the PI questions this lover, whose name I don't have, the guy was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. The PI showed him the phone records and he said, okay, yeah, we spoke. Yeah, we spoke that day. But no, I had nothing to do with Michael's disappearance. Okay, well, you just lied to me. So how am I supposed to believe anything you say? And he didn't just lie about that day. He lied about other things, the timing, the ongoing contact, like how frequently they talked. And now here's where the real suspicion comes in. Becca's whereabouts after 2 p.m. that day, Michael disappeared, completely unaccounted for. 2 p.m. is also the exact time that she was on the phone with her lover, boyfriend. But 5:50 p.m. is when she texted Michael saying, I'm just leaving work. That's not true, though. She left work at 2. So where was she between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m.? Her phone also went dark right after 2 p.m. So she leaves work around 2 p.m., right before 2 p.m. At 2 p.m., she calls her lover, and then her phone is undetectable. No activity, no pings, nothing until she gets back home after 6 p.m. when Michael is already gone. So where was she for those 4 hours? And why lie about when she left work to Michael? She left work at 2, but she told him, I mean, he never saw that text message, but she texted him at 5:50 and said she was just leaving work. Now, okay, maybe I could see this being her just wanting to hang out with her boyfriend that day and she didn't want Michael to know. So she left work at 2, but she didn't tell him that she left work until 6 because she spent the afternoon with her boyfriend. But if so, why was her phone off? I mean, look, Michael's a well-loved, very capable man, but I don't think that he's running phone record checks on her as to like where she's going. I guess that's why she maybe turned off her phone. She didn't want to be tracked by him in case he suspected something. Maybe. It all still feels like there's a lot of red flags now surrounding Becca and her behavior and what she's said is true and what's actually true. To me, she is prime suspect, like numero uno. Police, however, have a theory that they floated early on, and then they really clung to this pretty much throughout the entire investigation. The family never bought it, but police believe that Michael staged his own disappearance and even his own murder, perhaps. They say there's no signs of a struggle, and to them, the crime scene looked too perfect, which it did. And then their theory kind of forked. So they said either that, Michael staged this whole thing and then he either walked away to start a new life or he staged this whole thing and then he took his own life. Now, there's one small detail that kind of leans towards the former of those. I mean, at least on paper it does. Months before he vanished, Michael had been watching some type of like investigative true crime show with his son-in-law, David. Apparently, he turned to David and casually said, a person could disappear and make it look like an accident, and no one would ever find them. Pretty easily, they could do that. David at the time kind of brushed it off. Like, it wasn't like weird. Michael didn't say this with like a suspicious tone or, it was just kind of like a passing comment. And to this day, David says there's no part of him that believes that Michael actually meant that or that he was going to do that, because nothing about this theory that he staged this whole thing and then either disappeared to start a new life at 70 or there's nothing wrong with starting a new life at 70. I said that very judgmentally, excuse me. I just mean this man seemed to love his life. He loved his family. He loved his community. He's not a 25-year-old. It doesn't fit. And his family says the same thing. This doesn't fit who he is. You know, he was going to get mascara for his wife. He was playing with his great grandkids. He was singing at church. This isn't a man who is like secretly plotting an escape. This is a man who is deeply rooted in his family and his community. So this theory is just, police are really holding on to it. The family's not buying it. And it's frustrating because police are holding on to this theory, are they really looking that hard for who actually may have done this? Probably not anymore. Now, nearly 7 months after Michael vanished, the Hunt County Sheriff's Office brought in a cell phone expert to analyze Michael's pings and reconstruct his movements the day he disappeared. Because remember, there was footage of him at Walmart. There was no footage. They couldn't find footage on anything surrounding, like any surrounding businesses. Again, it's a very small town, so we can assume not everybody has cameras. So they're going to try and use his cell phone to reconstruct his movements. So they discovered from the cell phone expert that earlier in the day, Michael had crossed the Lake Tawakoni Bridge into town and stopped at a scenic pull-off by the water. Based on the data, he was there for about 10 minutes, just long enough to take in the view. But then something strange. Around 2:30 p.m., Michael's phone returned to that same spot. Only this time it took him 3 hours to get there. Using GPS metrics, the expert concluded that whoever had the phone was traveling at just 2 to 4.5 miles per hour, which is like, to me, that means nothing, but that's essentially a walking pace. People walk at 2 to 4.5 miles per hour. That's not driving. That's not on a bicycle or a skateboard. It's honestly really slow. It's like a slow walk. And right when the phone reached that spot, again, for the second time now that day, it went dark. Remember, Becca's phone also went dark just after 2 p.m. when she finished a call with her lover. The family's private investigator hired a second phone expert just to confirm these findings. Same result, same suspiciously slow speed. So, what did the sheriff's office do with this? Well, now their theory is that Michael staged the whole thing and then he took a bicycle to the bridge and jumped. Okay, let's break this theory down because there are more issues with this theory than even the previous theory, because now we have a bicycle involved. Okay, well, the average bicycle speed is 10 to 14 miles an hour, not 2 to 4. I don't even think you can bicycle that slowly. Even a leisurely bicycle ride is still faster than Michael's phone was seen moving on this data. Also, Michael's 70, has arthritis in both knees, and has literally never been seen riding a bike by anyone. The only bike at the house, or evidence of a bike at the house, is a broken bicycle that's hanging on a rack in the garage. There's no spare bike. There's no spare rack. There's no second rack for a second bike. There is no sign or indication that he owned or used another bicycle ever. And neighbors also chimed in addition to the family, and said, like, no, we've never seen him riding a bicycle. I don't know what my voice did there. Sorry. So naturally, police, of course, concluded that he must have been riding a bicycle. Like, what? A non existent, like, ghost bicycle, bleeding, possibly injured, on a 20-mile bike ride to this bridge to commit suicide while traveling very, very slowly. Like, the PI was completely baffled by this theory, as am I. Why would a man supposedly injured in his own garage hop on a bike that we don't even know exists and ride for miles and miles instead of taking himself to the hospital in his car if he was injured? And if this bike existed, why did it not turn up in the lake search? The bridge that he supposedly rode to commit suicide, according to the police now, it was a 9 foot drop into the water. It's like not even close to being fatal. The PI tested it and was like, you couldn't die jumping off of this bridge. And then in February 2018, almost a year after Michael disappeared, law enforcement, still convinced that this is what happened. He staged the scene, then rode the bike to commit suicide at the bridge, which is so weird. They searched the property across the lake because now they're thinking maybe he biked there to die. What? Why? I don't know if they got a tip or if something like indicated that, but like seems super random. Again, they found nothing. No bike, no body, and no logic to this. Still, the sheriff's office is kind of still pushing this suicide theory like it's the only theory that makes sense, even when, like, by all accounts, at least in my opinion, this makes the least sense of all. Like, how are we not more looking into Becca? And look, they did look into Becca. I never came across her alibi. I don't know if she had one. It just blows my mind that there was not more done at this point to see if she was involved. So where are we now? What are our theories? There's only a few. There's no new information. There is no evidence. There's no clues. Police are getting absolutely nowhere. They are now like searching properties across the lake to try and support their weird fuck theory about him bicycling there to commit suicide. They find nothing. So the theories, as they were, is that Becca was involved and knows more than she's saying. Perhaps. They can't prove that right now. Michael's youngest son, Justin, snapped. He did pass the 2 polygraphs, but that is still, I guess, a possibility in some people's eyes. Another theory is that Michael encountered someone while working in the garage. Like, he had that big front door to the garage open and somebody came by and went horribly wrong. Or that it was a carefully staged homicide carried out by someone close, someone who knew him well, someone who maybe stood to benefit from his death. If you don't know who I'm talking about Becca. But they couldn't prove any of this. They couldn't, there was nothing, there wasn't enough to make a case against Becca, apparently. I mean, none of this makes much sense to me. I'm baffled by it. One other interesting tidbit, I didn't really know where to put this in, but apparently the PI discovered that Michael had had a conversation with one of Becca's lovers about a year before he went missing. And he knew about at least one of these affairs, spoke to the lover and said, I'd really appreciate if you would stop seeing my wife. Don't know how the lover responded. Don't know if they stopped seeing each other, but we do know that Michael knew she was cheating at least with one person. And like, don't people always know? Not always. I'm not going to, never mind. No, no, no. I'm not going down that road. Sorry. That's a whole conversation that we don't need to get into. So, for more than 6 years, the question haunted everyone who knew him was, where is Michael Chambers? And then in late 2022, there was a discovery. On November 30th, a man hiking through the woods in Rains County, Texas, stumbled upon something strange tucked just off US Highway 276, an old bicycle and bones, which looked like human bones. The remains were sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification in Fort Worth. And in 2023, it took a long time to identify who these bones belonged to. And in 2023, they were officially confirmed to be the bones of Michael Chambers, the missing grandfather, the retired firefighter, the man who vanished from his own home, presumably on a quiet March afternoon. But just as quickly as one mystery was answered, another took its place. Because the cause of death, still unknown. No official ruling, no conclusive report, nothing. The investigation is still open, still active, and the same questions still linger. Did Michael leave on his own? Was he taken? And how, after all that searching, all those theories, did his body end up there? We may have found Michael Chambers' body, but the truth, still missing. And now I don't have the exact, I looked, I tried to figure out exactly how far this was that his body was found from like his home. Um, I know that that last cell phone ping of his at that like scenic outlook place, this was about 5 miles from that. So it's all within a 20-ish, 25-ish mile radius, I believe. It's not like it was found, 10 towns over. So, but again, did did he ride the bike there? There was a bicycle found near the bones. It didn't appear to be his bicycle. So, did he have a secret bicycle that no one knew about? And he rode it there very, very, very slowly and then died? I mean, it doesn't, it still screams foul play. And thank goodness this investigation is still open because this, look, I did not know him, but by all accounts, he seems like he lived a very meaningful, wonderful life and had a lot of love for his family and his community. And like he was a wonderful man. So, as with anybody that we cover, any victims, anybody who has met a tragic end, it is incredibly sad. And I cannot imagine how difficult this must be for his family, who now at least, I mean, come on, at least I guess has knows that he's dead and has some remains to perhaps bury, but not knowing who did this or who's responsible for it would drive me absolutely crazy. So, uh, I will include information in the show notes. If you know anything about this case, any tips, any information where you can contact for that. Um, I sincerely hope that this family gets some answers, and I'm very curious to know what the family's relationship is with Becca now and what happened with like the most I could find is that there wasn't ample evidence to pursue to pursue Becca as a suspect. I'd love to know more about that though, because to me that still seems like again, just I am speculating entirely. Becca could be completely innocent, and she is as of now, and she has not been proven guilty, so she's innocent. I know it's a real mystery trying to understand what happened to him, and I didn't even know him, so I can't imagine for his family. So thoughts and prayers with his family, friends, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and I hope that maybe sharing this story, because I hadn't heard this one, we'll just keep it in the public eye and keep people talking about it, and maybe his family will eventually get some answers that they very much deserve. So thank you for listening. I love you guys very much. Please subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please leave comments on Spotify. I love seeing all the comments. Leave an Apple review. All that stuff really helps the podcast. And for those of you who don't listen to the bonus episodes, I had somebody message me and say, you should let people know about your conversation at the end of the bonus episode on the last Death by Southwest headlines. Because I know a lot of people don't listen to the bonus episodes, although they are mostly true crime now. It's not me blabbing for 30 minutes. But at the end of the last Death by Southwest headlines, I did unintentionally kind of dive into a very long conversation about being a woman in her 40s, which is so fun. So a listener suggested that I just share that here so that people who don't usually listen to those, if they have any, if you're a woman in your 40s, or if you're married to a woman in her 40s and you want some insight, maybe you would want to hear that. Check that out. It's at the very end of the last bonus episode. So that is it. I'm going to stop talking and say thank you guys so much for always supporting me. And I will be back. I am planning to be back with another Death by Southwest headlines this week. If you're on Patreon, this is old news to you, but I have secured some new freelance clients, some new podcasts to work on in addition to working on Jim's, which I'm very, very excited about. And I will be able to tell you more eventually. I'm going to do my best to have it not affect this podcast, but I don't know, but what? But I guess there's your potential warning that maybe it will at times. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to do the best I can, guys. That's all I can keep doing. That's all we can all do is do the best we can do. I hope everyone's having a beautiful week. And Memorial Day I just realized that like 5 minutes ago when it popped up on my thing. Memorial Day is this weekend. So I hope if you are traveling or doing anything fun that you have a safe and wonderful Memorial Day long weekend. And I will talk to you guys soon. If you can't get enough of my blabbering and hearing about the rat problem that I have in my backyard and the dogs and all the things, head over to Patreon and you can join Patreon and get a very, very, very deep inside look into my life and the animals and all the things. And otherwise, I just appreciate you for being here. So longest ending ever. Bye, guys.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, good night and good luck.